Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
Thank you. I will start with the Right Honorable First Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda and the Minister for East African Community Affairs, Dr. Rebecca A. Kadaga, MP, who's seated next to me there. We have just exchanged contacts because we need to think East African, we need to think African. So it's a wonderful occasion to have you. Organizers of this solemn assembly, especially my dear brother, Andrew. I met him 3 years ago, a dynamic man, and we have remained friends ever since, exchanging ideas. And Professor George William Alenyo, I want to assure you that I'm not running for the presidency of the Luo Union in Eastern and Central Africa. I'm just an ordinary member of that community. Thank you for thinking about me, a great Pan-Africanist. And all the diplomatic representatives from various countries, I don't need to single out those countries and the entities. May I also acknowledge your presence. I didn't know that I was coming to a very international gathering. I was supposed to be here last year, but due to unforeseen circumstances, it has taken me one whole year to come, and God's time is the best time. Now, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being in this assembly and, reflecting upon some of these weighty issues. I want to introduce myself. I am a teacher by profession, over 40 years experience in my country, Kenya. High school, well, I taught English, or I still teach English, because it's the medium of instruction in schools. Kenya, I believe in Uganda too. Tanzania has a different language policy. That's what I discovered. I was even a British Council scholar. But for my doctorate, I reverted my attention to African studies. So like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he had a master's degree in English, but he stopped writing in English. He reverted to writing in his indigenous Gikuyu language, and then would later translate his works into English and Russian and Chinese. So charity begins at home. And then I want to remodify my topic. I like teaching, although I'm supposed to lecture or just give a presentation, but I'll make it pedagogical in approach. I have modified my topic to read African indigenous knowledge systems and development. Then subtitle, Ethno-conservation approaches to sustainable and healthy living. Why ethno-conservation approaches to sustainable and healthy living? Because conservation has to do with life. Conservation of resources, conservation of life, conservation of culture, conservation of everything. So we must think of a people-centered conservation approach or approaches. I want to pay tribute to a great Ugandan, and some of you might have not heard about him. A great Ugandan anthropologist And I want to test you, because I told you I'm not lecturing, I'm teaching. Once upon a time, there was a great Ugandan who went to play football in the United Kingdom. And that was, yes, in the United Kingdom. And then he stayed behind when the rest of the Ugandan football team was coming back. He stayed behind. I think he disappeared, into the crowd, and then looked for opportunities in the United Kingdom. It was during the colonial period, British colonial period. So he ended up in Bristol and took an advanced diploma in education. And as if that was not enough, he went to Aberystwyth, University of Wales at Aberystwyth, and took an LLB degree. But while he was taking his LLB degree, he heard something about trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal. He wanted to pursue it. What is trial by ordeal? And his lecturer told him, we don't do social anthropology here. After your LLB, please go to Oxford and register with the Institute of Anthropology under Evans Pritchard. And he did that. But when he was in Oxford, the first lecture, African culture was being referred to as primitive, backward, ignorant, and he stood up and protested violently and said, African culture is not primitive, Africa is not a dark continent, and our culture is as good as any other culture. So I want to test you, the Ugandans all the Ugandans in the house, answer. Or if you are a Ugandan, well, I was a Ugandan 600 years ago. Then I migrated to Kenya. And okay, will anybody wants to try? Yes. Okot Bite. Thank you, Joseph, my brother Joseph Ocheno from Eastern Uganda, Tororo, I think. Yes. Okot P. Bite. So in 1980, he was born in 1931 and he died in 1982 at the age of 51. But what he did is being retrieved now, and I'm one of the people in the vanguard of rehabilitating Okot Bite. In 1982, after his death at Makerere University in his house, I was moved because he had shaped my thinking. I had attended his lectures in Kisumu, in Kenya. So I wrote a tribute to Okot Bite. Okot Bite on trial. I wrote this play and the substance. I wrote this play as a tribute to Okot Bite in 1982-83, and it was published in 1993, and it has been revisited in Kenya 3 times. Kisumu twice, sponsored by Professor Peter Nyang' Nyogo, and Arusha during Festac. People like PLO Lumumba organized Festac in Arusha, so it was also stayed there. Of course, last year we had Festac in Kisumu, and this month, September, they are going to Ghana. You know what Festac is all about. It's all about black artists and all that. So, Okot Bite. Why am I starting with that narratology? African narrative epistemology. And somebody talked about, my friend from Kenya, epistemology. For me, I talk of African narrative epistemology. You must tell your own story from your own perspective. If you don't tell your story, someone will tell your story on your behalf, and the story might not represent you. So we must start with telling our stories. So, as I said earlier, African indigenous knowledge systems. That's my main topic. And I will focus on a very small area, ethnobotany. Ethnobotany. Notice that I'm not talking about botany. I'm talking about ethnobotany. And by extension, you can talk of ethnozoology. And you can, by extension, talk about ethno-veterinary medicine or veterinary sciences. And when I'm talking of veterinary or livestock development, the person who comes to my mind is the President of the Republic of Uganda. And his attachment to those indigenous long-horned cows. I would like to interview about that, why he's attached to those cows. And one time, 2 Kenyan leaders came to Uganda, and instead of treating them, in a house, he took them out to go and look after cattle. Raila Odinga and William Samoei Ruto. Now, by giving that example, I'm talking about our indigenous knowledge system. The Ankole cattle, the Borana cattle, the kienyeji kuku, the kienyeji seeds. And my brother from Kenya has just talked about that. The GMOs and the indigenous seeds. I did research in Homabay County, which is on the shores of Lake Victoria. I met a woman who was a plant breeder. And people would come to her every planting season and get the original seed. But do you know something? And the lawyers who are in this house dealing with IP and all that, do you know something? That, I don't know about Uganda, but in Kenya, they are outlawing, because of the big seed companies, they are outlawing sharing of seeds among farmers, among neighbors, among family. If you're found sharing or selling, it is an offense, and you can be jailed for 5 years. Can you imagine? Your food is being criminalized. So I am focusing on ethnobotany. By ethnobotany, this is anthropological. By ethnobotany, I mean people-centered botanical knowledge. And I gave a talk at the National Museums of Kenya 3 years ago, and I gave the same, a version of the same to Nature Tanzania. In Kenya, it was Nature Kenya, and my title was Indigenous Languages, Local Communities and Medicinal Plants in Eastern Africa, Ethno-Conservation Approaches to Sustainable Healthy Living. That was medicinal plants, but I'm now referring to food plants, not food crops, not food crops, not food crops. There's a difference between food crops and food plants. Like when your mother-in-law tells you, go cook, and you say, there is no vegetable in the house because you don't have sukuma wiki or cabbage. And then she says, okay, wait a minute. And she goes around the compound and harvests. It's not foraging, harvests the food plants. Mchicha, mrenda, and these sprout out of the earth as soon as the rains start. That is indigenous knowledge, indigenous food plants. So harvesting. So I am focusing on ethnobotany. And what do we mean by ethno-conservation? That is conducting research on indigenous knowledge systems covering the major ethno-ecological zones, and in my case, of East Africa. You can take Southern Africa, or I don't know whether Zimbabwe is in Central Africa or Southern Africa. I think it is in Southern Africa. So you can take your ethno-ecological zones. In Uganda, you will probably discover that you have so many different types of agro-ecological zones. So which are the indigenous resources, biodiversity available to you? And I think I listened to a tape recording of Bishop Joshua Mabonga 3 days ago when you're saying, go and do research, interview those elderly people, men and women, before they pass on. Even if you don't understand that knowledge which they are giving to you, just document, just record them. Now, ethno-conservation...
Professor, we have 1.5 minutes remaining.
Yes, and I'm summarizing now.
Okay.
Ethno-conservation, therefore, and you can bring up some of the issues because I've not exhausted the resources I brought along. So, one, culture. I'm going to give you 5 bullets if you're taking notes. Ethno-conservation and indigenous knowledge systems are conveyed through culture. And culture is like language. Culture is like language, and it helps us to understand ways in which we and the people around us live in our natural environments. If you take the Democratic Republic of Congo and the war going on in Congo, in North Kivu, South Kivu, Ituri, and other parts, it is resource-led. It is resource-based. The rare what? Earth minerals. I don't need to go into the politics of it, or the regional politics of it, the militarization and all that, or the international networks, but you know it. As much as I know it, that is resources. So culture as a distinct form of nature. Culture and nature are in tandem. They go together. 2, culture is knowledge. Culture is knowledge. And when I talk of culture, I'm talking about the trees in your compound, I'm talking about the goats, I'm talking about the sheep, the cattle. 3, culture is communication. We communicate through culture. Somebody has said that those who didn't wear the African print, you have questions to answer at the end of this session. I'm glad that I will go scot-free because of my shirt. Yes, and then that's culture, isn't it? That's culture. And then culture as a system of mediation, culture as a system of practices, culture as a system of participation. And culture is language. I'm not going to explain that because time is over. And then lastly, ethnobotany, which I started with. We need to understand the plants which grow around our compounds. And even the flowers you're planting, why are you planting them? The trees you're planting, why are you planting them? Are they ornamental trees? Or are they providing shade in your compound? Yeah, you must answer about these questions. So characteristics of plants, we must understand. Uses of plants, human attributes of plants, animal attributes of plants, their meaning in our folklore, and also the ones we borrow. For example, on your table, we have a lot of horticultural products. I mean, look at the table, horticultural products. So, the ones we borrow, because we have to borrow. And then lastly, we should think of food in terms of African indigenous knowledge system. Food, forage, materials, fuel, human medicine, animal medicine or veterinary medicine, then customs and traditions embedded in our ceremonial and ritual and religious uses of the plants we own in our environment. And that ends my story today. Tutinda, that's what you say in Luo. Tutinda.
Tutinda. Thank you very much, Professor Humphrey Ojwang from Kenya.
Free your mind now. Be part of the People's Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.